CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy. After 2 years and more than 80 episodes of our Conversations on African Philanthropy, we are introducing a series of conversations that are theme-specific, program-focused, and at times recorded at the request of those at the coalface of implementation in order to document and tell their experiences and stories. In the first of such series, we focus on the Zimbabwe Alliance Initiative, whose grants, convenings, capacity building, and technical support have fostered a vibrant civil society, where partners were empowered to design innovative and coordinated responses that amplify the voices of those marginalized, influence the capacity of citizens to mobilize around national critical issues, engage with policymakers, and built regional and international solidarity in pursuit of a better Zimbabwe. Formed in 2010 to strengthen the role of civil society in influencing Zimbabwe's transition to democracy, the Alliance has evolved over several phases to what it is today. An initiative of several partners, Zimbabwe Alliance is a story of resilience, innovation, dedication, and passion expressed somewhat beautifully in some of the least expected places and ways.
Welcome to yet another episode of our exciting Conversations on African Philanthropy with me, Moyo. On this part of the segment of our podcast, we are focusing on Zimbabwe Alliance, a donor collaborative initiative that was established just after the country was coming out of a political crisis, if one could characterize it that way. But it was responding to issues that had to do with the economic meltdown, the political crisis that led to the government of national unity. A number of donors came together, put some resources, and aimed at strengthening civil society, its resilience, but also its capability to intervene in certain sectors of Zimbabwe. But at the same time, this was a facility for grant making. One of the institutions that has worked very closely with Trust Africa and ZimAlliance is ZimRights. I'm excited to be joined now by Dzikamai Bhere, the National Director of ZimRights, but also the team leader of ZimRights. Welcome, Dzikamai.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. A couple of years back, I read that if you want to make sure that no one is left behind, you must be the last in the queue. I noticed that in the ordering of your team members on your website, you are actually the last. But also, before we came here on set, we were talking about the two titles that you have. One is the National Director and the other is Team Leader. But let's speak to this concept of if you want to make sure that no one is left behind, you must be the last in the queue.
Yes, I am a firm believer in that philosophy. John Maxwell says leaders eat last.
Yeah.
And Nelson Mandela teaches about leading from the back, from the behind.
Yeah.
So what you see on our website is indeed very deliberate. And it also shows in our shifting power to the people strategy, where we want communities to actively lead in creating and sustaining a culture of human rights. And I think that's the only way that we can sustain the interventions that we are working on.
Yeah. So let's talk about ZimRights. Of course, you have taken over from other leaders that have come before you. But in the time that you have been at the helm of ZimRights, but also knowing the history of ZimRights, maybe we could talk about, why it was necessary to establish an entity like ZimRights, and what are the gaps that you have been filling. And then we can move on to talk maybe more around the strategic interventions that you are currently engaged in.
Yeah, so ZimRights was formed some 32 years ago. We pride ourselves as Zimbabwe's first post-independence indigenous human rights advocacy group.
Yeah.
And over the years, we have grown to become a movement of over 250,000 individual members across all the 10 provinces of Zimbabwe. ZimRights was formed as an answer to the question of how do we make human rights everyone's business. This was a time back in 1992 when human rights were being treated like they are an elite issue, with lawyers dominating the conversation and it being very elitist. You know what we say at ZimAlliance, that for every question, community is the answer.
Yeah.
So while we had that question of how do we make ZimRights, how do we make human rights everyone's business, the founders of ZimRights saw it fit to establish a community of ordinary human rights defenders.
Yeah.
And hence emerged ZimRights as a mass movement. And when we look back over the last 32 years, indeed ZimRights has managed to, take human rights from what used to be an abstract concept to something that everyone is talking about. And just last year, as we prepared for the 2023 elections, we launched the People's Human Rights Manifesto, which is a testament to the fact that human rights belong to ordinary people, not only the select few. And in building that movement, I think we were able to answer the question of how do we make human rights everyone's business.
Yeah. So maybe we can now talk about some of the key pillars of your strategic intervention. Like you were saying, you actually work nationally. You also work with communities. I mean, before we joined here, you had a colleague who is the regional coordinator. But maybe let's talk about some of the key pillars of your programmatic intervention. And at some point, I would want to come back to talk about the manifesto, especially as it relates to your participation in the Citizens Manifesto, which was also another initiative by Trust Africa. So we'll come back to talk to some of these issues that are here. But maybe let's talk about some of your programs.
Yeah, so our vision is a Zimbabwe in which communities actively lead in creating and sustaining a culture of human rights. So I underline the words community leadership.
Yeah.
And how do communities lead? In our philosophy, they lead through action. Our current strategy, we've got 5 strategic priorities. The first is building a critical mass. As a mass movement, it's very natural that it becomes very important. We believe that if many voices come together, they can achieve more than having, one here and one there. So that becomes the first strategic priority. The second strategic priority is, of course, a high impact human rights programming. And that takes us to how we achieve these. So we work through what we call an 8 action zone framework. So just to unpack what that action zone framework is. So we are a mass movement. So you may ask, what do 250,000 activists do?
Yeah.
So as soon as you walk in, you want to understand which part of my activism am I most excited about.
Yeah.
So we did that membership engagement, had conversations as we were preparing for our current strategic plan. And we were able to map out that ZimRights members care mainly about 8 things. In other language, you could call those, thematic areas.
Yeah.
But we call them action zones because they are arenas of action.
Yeah.
Just to highlight a few of those action zones, the first action zone is human rights monitoring and response. And this is citizen-driven. There are 3 pillars to these actions. The first pillar is that community-driven. The second pillar is a solution-oriented.
Yeah.
So this is when communities engage in different solution-oriented. And the third pillar being human rights action.
Yeah.
So the first action zone is human rights monitoring and response. What sets us apart from other organizations that do human rights monitoring is that we actually don't deploy monitors.
Yeah.
Our members are citizen monitors in communities where they live. So they are the eyes and the ears of the community. They see human rights violations. We have tools that we use so that they are reported and they are documented, and they make effective use of the national human rights architecture to seek redress. The second action zone is what we call the civic engagement action zone. This is mainly focusing on, providing the relevant information for people to be able to demand and claim their human rights. So that's civic engagement. And under there, we've got very seasoned activists who take their time to disseminate all this information that we produce so that it helps communities take charge. The third action zone is the right to peace action zone. The right to peace action zone is born out of the UN Declaration on the People's Right to Peace. It seeks to mobilize people to claim peace in their communities as a right. And this is built upon the legacy of Zimbabwe, emerging from a period of gross human rights violations. Zimbabwe is the home of a liberation war that killed over 50,000 people. It is the home of Gugurahundi that killed over 20,000 people. And there comes a time when communities say, if leaders don't care about peace, we're going to step forward and do what we can to claim that peace. And it is from the Right to Peace Action Zone that we produce an annual report. It's called the State of Peace Report. So what I have with me here is the latest one that was launched about 3 weeks ago. It's called the Broken Calabash. The State of Peace Report 2023.
But before we go to the next action zone, maybe let's talk about what does this Broken Calabash stand for? In short, what it's a symbolism, of course.
Yes, it is a symbolism. So it stands for many things. If you go through the report, which was produced this year following the 2023 elections, it opens with a quotation that describes our situation as a broken calabash. It comes from an interview that I had with Trevor, in conversation with Trevor, where he was asking, why are we going through elections time and again? And the response that we shared in that reflection is that the system, the machinery, the architecture that is designed to deliver the people's will is like a broken calabash. And if a calabash is broken, why do you continue pouring milk in a broken calabash? So how do you respond? You fix the broken calabash. So it's a nation building motif. But when we launched the report, the broken calabash took a new meaning because it was launched at a community dialogue platform in Bulawayo, where communities then looked at this in a more holistic approach. And right now, the question that communities that are interacting with this report, the question they are asking is, who broke the calabash? Who broke the calabash? So that's a nation building motif for us. So that sits within the Right to Peace Action Zone.
So before we move, I noticed something very special here, that you paid tribute to Webster Zambara.
Yes.
So maybe we can take a minute and do that.
Yes, I agree.
Thank you so much. So who was Webster Zambara to you and the institution? I mean, we all know Webster, but I want you to, because you guys actually made it a point to dedicate this report to Webster.
So to me, Webster was a friend and a mentor, a peace builder, a true man of peace. To the institution, he was an advisor to the Right to Peace Action Zone. And this relationship goes as far back as 2020, when we launched the Right to Peace campaign. As a peace builder himself, he is the one who designed the tools, the original tool, the Right to Peace manual, that we use to train peace action committees that contribute to this report, and they are an anchor to the Right to Peace action zone. So for that reason, this year's State of Peace report is dedicated to him as a way of us paying tribute to the man of peace himself.
Thank you so much. May his soul rest in peace. I think we can talk about the third action zone.
So the fourth action zone.
The fourth, okay.
Yes, the fourth action zone is mobilization. And this focuses on, I can say it's the evangelization arm of the movement, trying to bring as many people as possible into the movement. So it engages in membership recruitment. They are linked to the civic engagement, because in recruiting more people, they need to spread the gospel of human rights. On average, every year, we add about 400 new members to ZimRights, and when they join, there's a process, there's an onboarding process, and that action zone is responsible for that. So that's action zone number 4. Action zone number 5 is the youth zone. This is Zimbabwe, and because of a number of reasons, we are losing a lot of good people, good activists, brain drain, the economy, and all those things. And because human rights work isn't easy, it's dangerous, with the PVO bill threatening to close the civic space, and Zimbabwe having been placed on a watch list by Civicas, we are losing a lot of good activists who are moving away from the struggle. So through the youth zone, we have decided to make a deliberate step to build the next generation of human rights activists. So we actively engage with youths around the 10 provinces, create dialogue platforms, provide mentorship, build relationships with them, create activities, do action learning sessions so that they get engaged. We, under that one, our flagship are the constitution clubs. We have 15 constitution clubs in 15 high schools across the country, where we bring young people to develop learning content on human rights. So that's the youth zone. Then the 6th is the elections and democracy action zone. Under the elections and democracy action zone, you know, I have said elections in Zimbabwe are an act of war. Because they deliver dead bodies and not the will of the people, they deliver bloodshed. So it became very clear that some of our members dedicate their time in working on elections as a way of trying to ensure electoral reforms that help in terms of fixing the broken calabash, but also mobilizing and motivating citizens to participate more effectively in elections. Following the 2023 elections, we produced this report, the Showing Up or Giving Up report. Many reports that you will see, they do the generic analysis of the electoral environment and things like that. With the Showing Up or Giving Up report, we went to the citizens and asked them how did they interact with the 2023 elections. And we were able to document here the mobilizing and demobilizing factors for citizen participation in electoral processes. So that's the elections and democracy action zone. But also it was still under the elections and democracy action zone that we were able to produce the People's Human Rights Manifesto as a way of making human rights values and virtues central to the electoral discourse. So that's the work of the elections and democracy action zone. Then we have the women and human rights, where we are engaging with different women and women's groups as a way of encouraging them to play leadership roles in the struggle for human rights. And finally, the 8th one is the media and advocacy, where we are harnessing the power of new tools, new technology to build a new community of human rights activists. We use these tools to effectively advocate for human rights. I'm sure if you have interacted with our social media platforms, we have a platform called ZimRights Live.
Yeah.
That engages through digital activism.
Yeah.
So those are the 8 action zones through which
Yeah.
we operate.
Great. I think I'm so intrigued by the publications, the many action zones that you're engaged in, which leads me to saying, in the last 32 years of existence of ZimRights, are there any specific milestones that we can highlight, and maybe within that some of the successes or success points that you can highlight?
Yeah, in the past 32 years, I think our greatest milestone has been to build a vibrant human rights movement.
Yeah, I mean 250,000 members alone is just massive.
It's massive.
Yeah, I heard we spoke to somebody who said their membership is 68,000. I thought it was a big number, but now I'm hearing 250,000.
Yeah,
that's massive.
And so looking at that movement, beyond the individual members, we have provided a firm foundation for all other human rights groups to be able to engage in communities.
Right.
What do I mean? Almost every human rights organization or even humanitarian organization that you may think of, for them to go into the communities and engage with the communities. The people, the food soldiers on the ground are the ZimRights communities, the activists. So if a humanitarian organization says they want to go and distribute food and they want to go into the community, the name that comes into mind is, where are the human rights, the ZimRights organizers? So you find those under the mobilization action zone because you ask them, you want 500 people, they will make sure 500 people are there. If you want 500,000, they will make sure 500,000 are there. So that's a milestone, and that has contributed to building a vibrant community. Organizations that do human rights monitoring, they draw their monitors from ZimRights members. Organizations that do election observation,
they do the same.
So it has provided that firm foundation for a human rights movement. So I think that's a great achievement. Then we were able to contribute to Zimbabwe's nation building and democracy agenda, because it was upon the same foundations that the constitutional movement was built in Zimbabwe, together with the Zimbabwe Council of Churches, Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Unions, and ZimRights. These organizations did create a vibrant movement, which delivered the 2013 constitution, and has since sustained a movement that continues to demand implementation of the constitution. So that's a big milestone for us. Another milestone has been our contribution to transitional justice in Zimbabwe. So ZimRights, through a number of actions, did put pressure for the establishment of a national architecture for transitional justice. We produced an award-winning film called Article 7, which raised which made the case for national healing in Zimbabwe. And because of that, we shared several awards across the world. We were able to influence the establishment of the organ on national healing and reconciliation, which ultimately then paved the way under the new constitution for the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. And we have continued under now the Right to Peace campaign to be a leading voice for national healing. On the democracy struggle, ZimRights has contributed to mobilizing communities to step forward and participate in electoral processes. We had a number of campaigns, we had the Tiswa Noacho campaign, we had the 10 by 10 voter mobilization campaign, and now we are doing the People's Human Rights Manifesto campaign. And if you follow these campaigns, we are going beyond just asking people to show up, but we actually now having a conversation around the values for the showing up. Is it enough to just show up to vote? But maybe it's not. You need to have values attached to the democracy discourse. So I can highlight those as some of the critical milestones.
No, thank you so much. I mean, as you are talking, I'm also realizing some of the people that have left us who are associated in one form or the other with the work that you are doing. You just mentioned the organ. We just recently lost Justice Nare. You also mentioned the constitution writing and how you and other people involved. We also lost Alex Magaisa. And so there's lots of work that has been going on in this space. But obviously in the last 32 years, and perhaps even in some episodic moments, ZimRights has to contend with the environment, the political, economic, but also the global development. So are there some specific challenges or barriers that you face as an institution as you try to do this massive work in these action zones?
There are many. There are many. So human rights work, Becky, human rights violations are committed by powerful actors who operate with an imaginable economic muscle. How do you match that as a non-profit? So that has constantly challenged us to go back to our strategy to say, how do we build power? How do we build people power to match the economic and the military might of human rights violators? So we have had to confront a very armed gang, if I should say. In 2008, our members were targeted across the country and their houses were burned simply because they were human rights activists. And so we have had to deal with physical attacks upon the institution, the use of propaganda, hate speech. We have had our offices raided. We have received death threats. You name them. So that's a challenge that we have continued to face. Another challenge is the shrinking civic space here in Zimbabwe. Civicus has just placed Zimbabwe on watch list because of the developments that are happening. The government is currently pushing for a PVO bill, which is going to significantly interfere with the operations of civil society organizations. So those are the general ones, but we need to be very honest with ourselves. Trust Africa is a very Pan-African institution. And ZimRights, the civic space suffers elite capture from different angles. So we pride ourselves as a movement because we're trying to push back against that elite capture. Elite capture comes from different forms. It can come from young professionals like myself who think that they now know better than the communities that they serve. And then they shrink what is supposed to be a movement to a small elite secretariat that now does not listen to the movement. So our strategy is called the Shifting Power to the People strategy. It's based on that to say movements must be defended and movement space must be protected. The second level of that elite capture is the donor capture. You see, our action zone framework was a response to elite capture, where because of our mobilizing power, a lot of donors simply, when they saw ZimRights, they saw, people who are mobilizing for elections. And we say human rights are more than just elections. So if you use your financial muscle to influence an organization to shrink into a one-issue organization, and when your foreign policy objectives have been achieved, you withdraw. It means you're significantly damaging the organization. So a lot of organizations are sitting on fragile ground because of that level of elite capture. The other problem that we are all facing is the problem of sustainability. 80% of our civil society partners, they get funding from government-related institutions. It's not a sustainable way of building movements. There's need for us to have a conversation around how do we build movements that are more sustainable. And the work that you guys are doing with the Africa Philanthropy movement speaks to that. How do we make sure that we invest in community philanthropy.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got 250,000
1,000.
members.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
How is it that we have not motivated them enough
Yeah.
to build their own movement,
Yeah.
to fund their
Yeah.
own movement?
Yeah.
And that mindset shift
Yeah.
is important
Yeah.
work of defending
Yeah.
civic space, because
Yeah.
without a sustainable base, we continue to
Yeah.
rest on fragile
Yeah.
ground.
Yeah. Beautiful stuff. Let's talk about what are the tenets of the People's Manifesto, the Human Rights Manifesto that is here.
Yeah. So the story of the People's Human Rights
Yeah.
Manifesto is linked to the Citizen Manifesto.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to unpack it
Yeah.
in a way that
Yeah.
gives us,
Yeah.
a holistic understanding of where the manifesto comes
Yeah.
from. The People's Human Rights Manifesto, of course, some of people may have heard it recently,
Yeah.
but the campaign started way back around
Yeah.
2017,
Right.
2016, 2015, when ZimRights was producing what were called community manifestos.
Yeah.
And these were happening at village level, and it was in response to increasing cases of violence.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make sure that local leaders who are closest to the suffering of the communities understand
Yeah.
the ugliness of violence and human rights violations. So that's when the conversations around how can communities agree with their local leaders to say this should not happen in my village.
Yeah.
And then they started developing the community manifestos. These were escalated to constituents level at that time.
Yeah.
And that was the time when we then plugged in with the broader movement,
Yeah.
the Citizens Manifesto,
Yeah.
which built the National People's Convention.
Yeah.
And ZimRights participated in those conversations and in hosting some of the conventions that were in multiple locations.
Yeah.
Now, as we moved into the year 2023, there was bickering around what politicians mean when
Yeah.
it comes to manifestos.
Yeah.
If you followed the Zimbabwean political space, you may even have heard one of the political parties saying, our work is our manifesto.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's when we
Yeah.
returned
Yeah. Yeah.
to the manifesto and said, okay, what is the place of human rights in all this political bickering?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we then went back to the communities, engaged the same assemblies, the the community manifesto champions,
Yeah.
and then we then compiled what we call the People's Human Rights Manifesto.
Yeah.
This is just a set of 10 key asks.
Yeah.
Key human rights needs. The true Bill of Rights interpreted in the language of everyday
Yeah.
human rights
Yeah.
needs. And once we had put these things together, in April 2023, we convened the Political Leaders Dialogue,
Yeah.
where we presented the manifesto to all the political leaders. So I'm happy to say all the political leaders, the leaders of the main political
Yeah.
parties in this
Yeah.
country,
Yeah.
including the current president,
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
signed up to the manifesto, and
Yeah.
they have appended their signature to the manifesto.
Wow.
And that has given the communities the right to hold them to account. So it's
Yeah.
got different elements.
Yeah.
As you go through the manifesto, you will notice that it has got a key ask that is grounded
Yeah.
in the Constitution.
Right.
And then it explains what that ask is
Yeah.
about. Next to the ask, there are 5 action points which the duty bearers
Yeah.
have to undertake in order to
Yeah.
satisfy the
Yeah.
demands
Yeah.
of that ask.
Yeah.
So that is the reality for the 10 of them.
Yeah.
Then as you get to the end, there's a commitment card where we then ask a duty bearer
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
append their signature. Once they do that, all the communities hound them.
Yeah.
This is where the tracking card then
Yeah.
comes in,
Yeah.
where communities are going to engage with their duty bearers, saying, are you doing this? Are you
Yeah.
doing this?
Yeah.
And as we speak, 212 duty bearers have received
Yeah.
from their communities
Right.
the manifesto. About 36 community dialogues have been held
Yeah.
post the elections to reflect on the obligations of the duty bearers. The recent engagement, which happened some 2 weeks ago, was around the protection of vulnerable communities,
Yeah.
which is in line with key ask number 1,
Yeah.
as well as key ask number 6, where we are then saying to the Parliament, you committed to doing this.
Yeah.
Can you remove
Yeah.
the Vagrancy Act, which allows police to punish people who are homeless, instead of the state putting in place social safety nets? Just an example of the engagement that our communities are having on the manifesto.
So maybe for purposes of our audience, it might be useful for us maybe to just say what is Ask 1 without going into detail, ask 2. Just for purposes of our audience, because I find this fascinating. I don't know, we'll talk about it because it would be good for the guys to also capture those signatures if need be. But we'll talk about that after the conversation.
Yeah, so key ask number 1 is uphold and defend the integrity of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, and that comes first. Once a constitution comes into place, the next thing that politicians want to do is to tear it apart. Key ask number 2, respect the political rights of all Zimbabweans. We suffer from serious political polarization. Key ask number 3, make quality healthcare services accessible to all. Number 4, improve access to basic amenities and services. Number 5, provide affordable quality education for our children. Number 6, protect and promote livelihoods. You know, we've got a legacy of Mrambatsvina. Over 700,000 people displaced. Just yesterday, Bhere Musika was in flames, and over millions worth of trade merchandise was lost, and a lot of livelihoods depend on Bhere Musika. But it was a foreseeable risk. Somebody didn't pay attention. Provide land and decent housing to all. Over 1.5 million Zimbabweans are homeless. Facilitate the exercise of freedoms. You know, the right to protest in Zimbabwe is almost been abolished. You can't do that anymore. Practice good governance and fight corruption. Every year we're losing over 20 billion. That's 4 times the size of our national budget. Every year we're using 20 billion. Be accountable to the people of Zimbabwe. So those are the 10 key asks that are captured in the manifesto.
But I was fascinated also by the tracking element, and that's where your actions on monitoring and etc. comes in.
Yes. So the tracking is meant to make sure that, you know, we've produced so many documents in this country. We have the People's Charter, we've all these things. And the tracking part is the one that sets the manifesto apart, where communities said a manifesto and then what? So that's then comes in the accountability mechanism, where we have communities that are now monitoring the implementation of the manifesto. So in addition to this manifesto, we have a dedicated platform, manifesto.zimrights.org.zw, where communities put their stories, their pictures, their engagement as a way of, you know, trying to build the movement. But in addition to that, we also have resources there, including a training manual that then allows you to download it. You can train a small group of activists, and already they are beginning to engage with their communities. We have a pocket edition of the manifesto. We have a one-page edition of the manifesto. Sometime last year on Valentine's, we actually had manifesto roses that we were distributing in the streets as a way of getting the communities, you know, to hold their leaders to account.
Great. So one of the, of course, over the last 32 years, you've engaged with so many groups, individuals that support your work, and one of them is Trust Africa, that has supported at some point some of the work that you do and your association with them. Maybe let's talk a bit about, you know, the association that you have had with Trust Africa at different levels. It could be financial, it could be convening, it could be the participation that we already spoke about in the Citizens Manifesto, but also the cabinet, the Citizens Cabinet. So maybe we can talk in maybe the last few minutes around that.
In 2016, we hosted the Africa Democracy Forum, and we did that in partnership with Trust Africa and other partners, which brought delegates from all over the continent to engage with the democracy question. And you can imagine what was happening in 2016. We had started democratic backsliding for those who follow the situation in Zimbabwe. The rallies had started, and the ZANU-PF succession disputes were threatening to consume the country. And tragically, in 2017, we witnessed the military coup, which was an overthrow of the constitution. So convening the Democracy Forum was an important way of drawing world attention to the democracy situation in Zimbabwe. If you were to ask me, I would think today is another day. This time where we are is another time where we probably need to be doing similar focus, because the situation again is heating up with threats, the threats on civic space, with the threats to overthrow the constitution and put in a third term for the current president, with Zimbabwe taking over the chair of SADC and using convening SADC to violate human rights violations and even issuing threats against civil society. So there is again the experience of democratic backsliding, and those conversations did help. And then we also participated in different forums around the Citizens Manifesto, which ultimately led to the convening of the National People's Convention. And ZimRights was able to host some of the conversations around building people power and building resilience in communities. As we moved, so that was around 2019, as we moved to 2020, COVID-19 came in. And it affected how we build active communities. Particularly because of the way the government of Zimbabwe responded to COVID-19. Human rights violations increased during COVID-19. The parliament was overthrown during COVID-19. Over 68 pieces of legislation were passed without the participation of parliament. It was basically overthrowing an important arm of government. So we worked with Trust Africa to document human rights violations, and we produced a documentary which encouraged the government to fight COVID-19, but not to violate human rights in the process. If you watch that document, you will hear community voices, particularly around the area of livelihoods. You know how the government suddenly decided they would close the informal sector. And yet elite businesses were given preference. They were able to open during COVID-19, and yet the vendors were displaced. So we did highlight that. And the police, the way they would respond, with a situation in Mtare where the police collected vegetables from the market women, our mothers who were struggling to make ends meet, and decided to ban all those things. So we produced a documentary there. We've also done quite a number of engagements together with Trust Africa. We participated in the Africa Philanthropy Conference. We also, there were quite a number of conversations that we were part of as a way of, building the community, community power for human rights.
So I would really want us to go on and on, because the way you're articulating things is in a calmly way, but so powerful, man. I really enjoy the conversation. But maybe we end with where we had started, where I was saying, does it run in the family? So people are hearing all this beautiful work that you are doing, and at the helm of this, impactful organization. But for us to just get to know a little bit about you, you are a lawyer. I was saying that I thought I had met you before, but I realized actually it wasn't you, it was your brother. But who is Dzikamai?
So I identify myself more as an activist than as a lawyer, because of the lit capture that we spoke about, and to the community that I serve in ZimRights. Really, that's what I am. I'm an activist. I'm a co-activist with the communities that we accompany with. I'm a firm believer in civic leadership. And I think for the 5 years that we have worked, we're talking about resources that we have been producing. We, through the 8 Action Zone framework, think our main role is to provide tools and resources for the communities to be able to do this work, even when the secretariat may not exist because of the PVO bill. or many other things.
Yeah.
So I am a firm believer in empowering communities, but I'm also a firm believer in building civic leaders, ethical civic leaders who are courageous, who step forward and are able to do the work no matter where they are. And I believe leadership is not positional. We here at ZimRights, we have worked with a lot of young people. We work with Zinasu, we work with We Lead, a lot of young people who come through the youth zone. And our goal is not for them to come into the physical space called ZimRights, but our goal is for us to be able to provide support to them wherever they are so that they can lead movements in different spaces that can cause impactful change.
Thank you so much, Dzikamai. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. But for us and the audience to know more and more of the work that you do, I'm sure they already know about ZimRights, but it also helps to have you just articulate it in simple but powerful ways. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. That was Dzikamai Bhere, the National Director, but also the team leader at ZimRights. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the CAPSI podcast series, Conversations on African Philanthropy.